Can you see my screen right now? I'm sharing my
Yes, we can see.
desktop.
Yes.
Very good.
Yep.
All right. And can you see my camera now?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah.
So, Rajni or Anubhav, just let us know when we are good to.
I think it's 4:30. We can start.
Okay. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon from the YLC family. Today we have a very important session, and I know many of you have written to me personally that we talk about all these sessions around, what's going to happen, crystal ball gazing from different industries, from government side, from academia, but everybody's saying that, boss, what about money? So that's the favorite topic for everyone. See how the capital is going to flow in their respective industries and companies. That's the hot question everybody has. So I thought, we will have a session specifically dedicated on how the capital is going to flow into the industry. So the way we will do it is, before I'm going to introduce our both the speakers, but we're going to look at it in a three-tiered manner. So we're going to look at the on a macro level that what the government is doing, what kind of stimulus packages, schemes, grant government is thinking about. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We also want to talk a little bit about various industries and sectors and how they are impacted by the current crisis, and what are the opportunities in some of these sectors, in some of these industries. What kind of products and services would see more and more capital infusion happening? And we'll also look at the trends around M&A consolidation across these industries. And then finally, on a more molecular level, we would look at that as a startup, sort of what are the opportunities for you to raise funding at this time? What are the alternative capital instruments available for you? Should you go for equity? Should you go for debt-based instruments? So what kind of options are there for you as a startup in the current times? Or is it a time to wait and watch? Should you not really go after capital raising at this stage because of stressed valuation? So we're going to cover all these aspects and more today. And I would really appreciate you sending more and more questions in the chat, and we will consolidate and take them. So first thing first, we're really happy to have two of our YLC, sort of, I would call them family members with us. Pranav, as you all know, is also the YLC vice chairman, and Samir is a mentor with us. And Pranav is the founder, partner, and chief investment officer at 314 Capital, which is an early stage venture capital firm based in Bangalore, which he co-founded. And as part of 314 Capital, he has made over 40 odd seed capital and venture based rounds, and in India as well as in US. So it's a global firm. And he has also invested on behalf of his father, Mr. Mohandas Pai. The private fund has been consistently ranked as India's one of the top angel investment firms. And Pranav also serves on the board of multiple companies in which he has made investments as part of his portfolio. And before 314, Pranav was an early employee and senior product manager of the global edtech firm, which you all know as Edcast. It's based in the Bay Area in SF in US. And he's also a keen philanthropist. He sits on board of a lot of advisory boards and steering committees, a lot of government initiatives and non-profit endeavors. And he's a Stanford graduate. He ticks all the right boxes, and he was also he hosted Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Google Plus Code in India in 2015. And our other esteemed YLC mentor, Samir Braj Verma, he is the managing director at Nexus Venture Partners. where he opened actually and now leads their Bangalore office. He has led investments in all these startups you've all heard and read in the news, like Postman, Unacademy, uh, Zolo, Hasura. The list goes on and on. I think it's more than 40, 50 odd companies he's invested in. And prior to Nexus, Sameer was the founding member at Reliance Capital's early stage venture capital fund, which is Reliance Ventures, where he did investments in Paytm, which was then the stake was acquired by the Chinese giant. He also made investments in HealthSpring, Dhamma Innovations, and eBrand Communications CareerCom. And he's also the founder of Breakthrough Capital, a public market equity investment entity, which he co-founded. He's also an advisor to AngelList India and Microsoft Ventures, and a 40 under 40 alternative investment professionals in India by IEAIS. He's also a global panel member at MIT Technology Review, and he has served in operating roles at UT Starcom, Ericsson, and a lot of other technology companies. So, guys, we are in safe hands. Between Pranav and Sameer, you're gonna get all your answers in terms of what to do with your business, how to scale it up, and what are the avenues to raise funds. So the way we have structured the session is first, Pranav has already noted some of these common FAQs which I've shared with him, and he's got a very slick deck which he's gonna run past and actually answer many of these queries and apprehensions and fear which we have. And I think what we'll do is after that initial presentation from Pranav, both Pranav and Sameer are kind enough to then answer all our queries, which we'll take up. So a warm welcome to you, Pranav and Sameer. And I'm going to request Pranav to sort of take over and run past your presentation with us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Karthik. Can everyone see my screen? Is this still clear?
Oh, we can see your screen. Yes,
fantastic. All right. So great to be here. Thank you for your time, everyone. And it's an interesting topic. We'll try to cover as much as possible in the first 20 minutes. So I'm going to zoom through some of these. Most of these news items, I'm sure everyone has read in the news. Everyone's watching the news closely, waiting for the next set of relief measures. But I thought what we'll do in the first 20 minutes is summarize everything we've learned so far. Maybe show you some interesting studies coming out from investor groups where people are now thinking about what the next set of opportunities may be. Hopefully that informs you of where money might go next, if there's any money available and how much there is. And finally, we'll keep zooming out back to the global scenario to check on how the rest of the world is doing and where India is trying to figure itself out in what is very clearly a new rebalanced world order. So first things first, the health impact is the most important. None of us, at least Sameer and I, aren't doctors by training for sure. So we will not spend too much time on the health aspects. What we can tell you is that if you look at when the first case was detected in most of the countries in the world, and let's look at the top right here. You can compare India to the US, Italy, UK, and Spain. Most of these countries had their first case detected around the same week. You can see since then, of course, the US, Italy, UK, Spain, their cases have soared. US has crossed 1.2 million cases now, over 76,000 deaths. And the most interesting statistic we were able to find is the cases per 1 million and deaths per 1 million. And if you compare us to US, Italy, UK, Spain, most of the countries, in fact, in the top 10, India is not even at 100 cases per 1 million yet. However, strange things are happening now. Everyone's seen that we've come out of the lockdown fairly viciously. There are long lines everywhere. There are a lot of people now going to hospitals. It seems like we have bought time for very clearly a lockdown exit that we weren't fully prepared for. So most people are now expecting news of a second wave. Everyone has to remain careful, as you know. So this is only a snapshot as of today. But so far, India has done well in containing this. All of us should hope and should continue our efforts to make sure it stays contained. But this is the snapshot as of today. And on all counts, if you can see the bottom graph also, especially when it comes to death rate per million, India has done a good job. So it seems like the lockdown has worked. And we have to be careful to make sure we don't lose the gains the lockdown has given us. But of course, the lockdown has come at a great cost. And while the government's clear, especially the administration, that it's lives over livelihood, livelihood is certainly very badly impacted. Now, the world is also doing poorly. In fact, most of the world is expected to go negative in terms of GDP contraction this year. So you can see on this graph over here that this is a slightly dated graph now, but I just wanted to show you how quickly revisions are revised. India was predicted to be at 2.1% GDP growth this year. compared to an initial 6% before the crisis. And most of the rest of the world, especially the G20, were going to go below zero. But since then, there have been multiple revisions, especially because of how different countries have responded with stimulus and relief programs of different magnitudes. India's is amongst the lowest, which we'll talk about in a moment. But overall, the world is pretty clear that this is very clearly a recessionary environment. It is going to take time for the world to recover. And all the recovery is hinged upon, for the first time, is hinged not upon what central banks do, not upon relief dollars. This is a health recession. It's been a long time since we had a non-financial recession, and the whole world is now learning how to deal with a recession where the health economy is the reason why we're in this problem in the first place. That being said, we should remain optimistic for the most part. India has some secular trends giving it some advantage over aging countries like the US, most of EU, Japan, and even China now. But if we don't do enough to protect ourselves, that advantage may not last through this recession. So we'll talk about what some of those vectors look like on following slides. Now, what's happening the world over with economic relief? Every country in the world has taken this as a wartime scenario. And usually in a war, three things happen. Of course, economic activity grinds down very quickly. Number two, instead of less spending, there's actually more spending because governments start spending much more than they usually do to get people to manufacture goods, manufacture services, support the front line. First scenario, contrary to popular opinion, countries actually spend more than a regular scenario. They build arms, they build armaments, they set up new food supply chains and so on. They do conscription. So all of those things are what happens in a war. The world is reacting to the COVID situation similar to how it would react to a war. All countries in the world, even smaller countries like Germany, Italy, and so on, are spending more than most people thought was possible. You can see the graph here. Double-digit percentages of their GDP, which is insane, not seen before for a very long time. And this is a signal of how important central banks and governments the world over are treating their action against this crisis. There's another dimension that's equally important. It's not just the amount of money they're announcing as stimulus. It's also the severity of the execution or the strictness of the rules that comes in accessing that money. And on the right, you can see, and I'm sure most of you have seen this graph, India is nowhere close to being anywhere in this percentage of relief announced so far. But India is amongst the highest in terms of the stringency index, the strictness with which any citizen in this country can access any of the economic relief announced. So the US, for example, while it is very clearly committed to over $10 trillion of stimulus, unbelievable. That's what they're prepared to do to save their economy. They're also they're not very strict about how its citizens can access those dollars, right? And different countries have different strictness when it comes to accessing. But India seems to have the least in terms of fiscal stimulus and also the strictest. And it's a strange combination because as tax-paying citizens, as businessmen and women, as participants in this economy over the last 10 years at least, we've been compliant, we've been optimistic, we've been paying our taxes, we've complied with GST, we've gone through several shocks in the banking world. So we've already been severely impacted negatively for different reasons before this crisis. So one would assume that we'd have immense government support when it came to helping the country respond to a crisis like this, but that hasn't come out yet. We are hopefully staying optimistic. There should be some announcements soon, but we have to be realistic about how far behind we are when it comes to this with respect to the rest of the world. And just to put this in scale, and I think this is a repeat of the last point, but I just wanted everyone to see what large-scale stimulus looks like. The US is by far more than most of the other countries combined, and that includes China. That's just how severely they've taken this kind of economic contraction. And that's how far the central bank, the Fed in the US, is willing to go. And what the US has done strangely, and we should take special care for this, the US has used its position as the world's reserve currency now and actually strengthened that position when it compares to the other currencies that could have competed for it. Mainly, there were only three in competition. There was the euro, there was the Chinese currency, and then might have been a derivative of the euro, like a pound or a German currency, if the euro were to collapse. But very clearly, after the Fed has responded in this magnitude with this rate of spending, it's very clear that there is no other alternative now, and any claims for a reserve currency before COVID have all gone away. It is by far very clear the US is going to come out of this much stronger, and it's the only country that can spend at this magnitude to forcefully pull its economy back out of this kind of recession. So this is something we must be aware of. India does not benefit from this, of course. We have to be careful about, therefore, the new allies we build. The headlines are always screaming that India must take advantage of the anti-China rhetoric right now and invite business to India. So hopefully we will take advantage of these shifts, but we should be clear that this shift is scary, it's large. We've never seen this before in our lifetime. So what has India done? What has India's response been? On a humanitarian dimension, all of us must agree, whatever we may feel as businessmen, as investors, whatever our profession might be, India's first response was to protect its most vulnerable people. And that is admirable. That is the right thing to do. We elected a government democratically, and we have to make sure that the most vulnerable sections of our country are first protected. That's happened. The finance minister's first announcement was a 1.7 lakh crore, almost 23 billion relief program for the bottom 80 crore people. So the bottom 800 million people. Now, 800 million people is 2/3 of the country. That's a large bottom. But all questions aside, it was the right thing to do. And all of us should be happy that the government took that first step to protect that section of the population first. So LPG cylinders, food, medical support, income support, DBT, you've seen all these measures. And that was significant. It was good that we got that done. And on the liquidity side, the RBI was surprisingly quick. And in spite of what all of us might have expected. Muted. Can you hear me, Karthik?
Yes. I think somebody unmuted it. Sorry.
No problem. So we must be also optimistic that the RBI came to the stand very quickly. They announced a fairly large repo operation. They announced liquidity enhancement measures. They cut the repo rate and so on. But that was about all that was announced. The next step of relief, the next step of impact, the next step of help for businesses, for employers, for tax-paying citizens, that is still not come. And so we are stuck in this quagmire of we help the bottom, we help the top. What about the big middle? This is where all the taxpayers are. This is where the businessmen are. This is where the employers are. What about us? So the middle is still pending. We are concerned that the longer we wait, the harder morale is being hit. Morale is at its lowest point from all these surveys we're seeing, and it's only getting worse every day. And that's reflected in how industry and business have reacted to all that's happening in the economy. Now, all of you have read the news again, so I won't repeat this too much. But across industry, FMCG, retail, aviation, fintech, hospitality, real estate, almost every vertical of the industry in India has seen significant contraction. Of course, there are some winners. There are some sections of companies that are acyclical or in whose favor these trends have shifted positively. But overall, there's been significant contraction, and I'm sure all of us are concerned that if the government doesn't step in time, this is only going to get worse. What's also happening as a result of a delayed response, let's call it a delayed response for the middle, is because we are not supporting employers, because we are not supporting tax-paying citizens, because we are not supporting the middle, which really builds the spine of the Indian economy. We're seeing factory shutdowns, we're seeing travel restrictions, and this is in the backdrop of globally weaker demand, lower commodity prices, financial shocks. So a lot of things happening in the background that will already impact us even if we had relief. And without relief, we are now more vulnerable. With all these things put together, it's no surprise that every week, like I said, India's GDP growth estimates seem to be getting lower and lower. And today, for the first time, someone announced that, I think it was Moody's, announced that we might actually go to zero. So we may not grow at all in GDP this year. So these are scary times.
ये error तब आती है जब उसमें
sorry, Karthik, you may have to mute someone again. So these are scary times, and let's talk now about why this economic crisis is different. And here I'll quote some slides from one of our partner research firms called Praxis. And interesting way to summarize the economic crisis here is that there are four reasons why this time it's a little different. It's much more sudden. So we've never seen a sudden grind of the economy like this. Even during war, it takes time to come down, and war escalates over time. But a sudden drop like this is something that most of the world's never seen before. This economic shock is also more pervasive. Never has an economic shock hit almost the entire world at more or less the same time. So the timing and the intensity both combined, that coupled effect is something that the world's economy has never felt this way before. And please, we must all remember, of course, that this shock has come in a fairly fragile time in the world's economy. We already had this escalating US-China trade war. The Middle East is always willing to explode at a moment's notice. We had the protests in Hong Kong. We had the refugee crisis in Europe. We had a bad Brexit. We had the NBFC crisis in India. We had, of course, a US election coming up, and the US election year is always a volatile year for the global economy. So the backdrop of this shock wasn't also our strongest foot forward as far as the timing is concerned. That was another reason why we were a little bit more vulnerable. And finally, the last 2 decades, since 1995-96, when the new set of NAFTA rules were announced, you can possibly or arguably say that 95-96 is when we saw the globalized world coming together, what we enjoy today. For the last 20-25 years, we've seen the global economies become more integrated. We've seen export and trade rules soften. We've seen China's rise to becoming a superpower, the second largest economy in the world. India is now the 5th largest economy in the world. We beat France, we beat UK. We've obviously been beneficiaries, but never before has the global economy been so integrated. So when the sudden shock hits the entire world at once and everyone's so intermingled and everyone goes down together, this is obviously going to lead to a revision of this globalist mindset. And Trump is very clearly on one side of that argument over the other. America first. Most countries are now going to say it's my country first. Poland and most of Eastern Europe, Germany is hearing calls for that. Most of the Nordic countries, most of UK with the Brexit, everyone's going their country first. So that's also another shock that we should all prepare for, and likely is going to lead to a lot of rebalancing. So this crisis is different as far as the world is concerned, and it will hit India in different ways. Now let's come closer to home and closer to all of us as businessmen, as entrepreneurs, as founders, as participants in the economy in India. What are investors saying about their investments, their portfolio companies in India? This is a survey of around 50 or 70 investors done by Praxis. Overall, for the next 6 months, most investors are clear that they're not expecting any growth. And as far as profitability is concerned, they're going to see a decline in profitability. As far as next round of fundraising or new modes of equity financing or even debt, when it comes to raising capital, they're seeing significant contractions in companies' ability to raise capital. And of course, the last dimension always, because this is India, this is a political economy. We are not yet as free of the socialist backdrop of this country as we'd hoped we'd be by 2020. And that's why support from government is vital, because we're so tightly controlled. Most of investors are not expecting too much government intervention to come in on time. So that means Indian industry is expected to be able to deal with the shock by itself. So it's a strange time, and sentiment is bad. However, another very interesting measure of sentiment is, especially in the startup world, is what do investors think about exits, about liquidation events, about M&A activity, about listing companies in the public bourses and so on. 89% of investors, almost unanimous, feel like their exit plans will be deferred, IPO plans will be deferred. So we are all, as an industry, expecting that this is going to lead to a significant right shift of all of our plans for growth, for exit, for fundraising, at least in the startup community. That being said, there is still optimism in investors, especially in India, because India still has very significantly positive long-term growth potential. And why do we say that? India has, if you see the first graph on the left here, historically had amongst the lowest debt to GDP ratios and the lowest external debt compared to other countries that we are usually competing with, like the US, UK, China, and Brazil. Does that mean India is more prudent? Does it mean India is more efficient with spending money? Not really. India is just bad at raising debt outside India. That's the measure of our external debt. And there are two reasons. Number one, it's nothing to do with an elected government or a certain party being in power. the Indian administration, the bureaucracy, as you would call them, has historically always been averse to India raising debt outside. And that's why India's participation in global bond markets is historically not very high. So we have not taken advantage of a significant liquidity increase over the last 10 years. All of you have seen that the US, China, all countries in the world are increasing their borrowing and spending that money that they raise outside in protecting their economies, improving their growth prospects, and building slightly stronger firewalls for their local companies. India has not done that. We have not taken advantage of the last 10 years as much as we could have, but that is an advantage now because we have to now repay less debt. So hopefully, since we didn't borrow in the past, we can, with a less debt burden, grow a little bit faster and not have as much of a debt repayment to cover our growth. So it could be an advantage now. We have to use it as an advantage. That remains to be seen. But objectively, it could serve to improve our growth prospects and recover from a shock like this. You can also see that there are strong tailwinds in the form of falling crude prices. India's largest import is oil. We do not have enough oil cover in our local economy, as you know. With oil prices crashing, with futures going negative, India should be able to build up strategic reserves again, should take advantage of the situation. Hopefully we are. But that, again, remains to be seen. We need to spend money to buy oil in advance. But if we do all these things, the ideas for India to take advantage of the situation are very clear. They're all over the news. None of this is unknown. What remains is our administration must decide this is the time to take advantage, and we have to spend money to take advantage of these trends because these things don't happen very often. What's happening with investments now in India? Most investors surveyed concluded that healthcare, education, BFSI, and IT and SaaS, SaaS is software as a service, these four sectors will see the most investment opportunities over the next 3 to 12 months. No surprise, because obviously now healthcare becomes more important, especially in a health recession like this. Most people are seeing significant shifts in education. Since children and college students cannot go to school, they need more education options at home. Parents are scrambling to get their children access to high quality content so that they can continue their learning. A lot of that change may be permanent. There may be a permanent shift in how children study in India after this crisis. So a lot of these behavior shifts behind these industries are leading investors to be positive about investing in these four. Food, media, agriculture, e-commerce, logistics, consumer retail, there still remains some positive sentiment. But for the short term, obviously, there have been negative consequences on most of the restaurant industry, most of the entertainment industry, especially when it comes to movie distribution, most of logistics because of the sudden lockdown and the impact on labor availability. So short term, there's going to be significant disruption, but there should be a lot of investment interest in these sectors also once we begin recovering. Now, what happens in a recession like this? India's recession, as we saw earlier, is going to be very different from the rest of the world's. India is not spending enough compared to the other countries to recover from this. So we're not going to have too much liquidity coming to the middle. But of course, our economy is a little bit stronger because it has less external debt and it has much more internal consumption. So we have a positive and a negative because we're not spending enough money, but we have some cover internally. So in the middle of these two convergences, you will see a lot of interesting options. So for example, if you talk to the founders at Zerodha, they'll tell you that a lot of first-time Indian investors are spending crores and crores of rupees every day buying stocks for cheap. Everyone's buying Reliance, everyone's buying TCS, everyone's buying Unilever. This is happening in the US also. A lot of the first wave of optimistic investors are trying to take advantage of weakness in the economy. It's a good example. Of course, businessmen should also be taking some advantage because when interest rates fall like this, theoretically, it is easier to get loans or refactor older loans and get a better price for your loans in a time like this. But that, again, the banks have to lend. There is a blockage in the banks right now. So in practical terms, that's not yet happening. But if you pay attention to some of these trends, you can hopefully take advantage of some of these trends and improve the resiliency of your business coming out of this crisis. And we hope as investors, of course, our job is to help our companies do that a little bit more efficiently. Most investors we know, investors like Samir at Nexus, their only job right now is making sure their current companies are staying aware of what's going on and trying to take advantage of whatever comes up when the opportunity presents itself. So do keep an eye out. And we'll talk about some examples of opportunities and how some companies are taking advantage, or at least trying to. So on the left, you can see that some companies in grocery, pharma, home and furniture, fashion, smartphone apparel, and laptop accessories, they're seeing increased sales, increased retention, higher ticket prices. Many people, because they're staying at home and are likely to stay at home for longer now, if there's a second wave, are trying to make their homes a little bit more conducive to working. So we're seeing a lot of transaction activity on companies that are in these areas. But of course, for every positive, there's a negative. And while there may be a positive impact on the left, in mobility, in hotels, in movie, event ticketing, food delivery, there have been falls. And there are significant falls. And some of these falls might be existential situations for companies in these areas. So there will be some positives. Hopefully, most businesses can take advantage of these situations, but there will also be a lot of negatives. And that's something that companies must be careful about and prepare for. Finally, going back and zooming out for what the world is expecting for the rest of the calendar year. Right now, let's talk about the US for a moment. On the left, you'll see there's a historical rise in unemployment insurance and unemployment claims there. Over 3.5 million people have claimed unemployment cover as of 3 weeks back. Another 1.5 million people over the last week. This has never been seen before historically. So if you look at even the 2008 financial crisis here, the unemployment rise here it looks like a joke compared to what we're seeing now. But in this backdrop, this is really bad. This is the mainstream American economy. This is Main Street. This is regular people, regular homes, regular wages, regular income. With so many people going jobless and requesting help from the government, in that backdrop, you are seeing the US public markets, the NASDAQ index is an example, actually go profitable over their pre-COVID levels, which is insane. No one expected this to happen. Everyone expected a significant drop, but this rally is something that doesn't seem to be stopping. So this is what we call a divorce from reality. While Main Street and while the mainline economy is at a point where it is really sick and can potentially get sicker, the equity markets, because of so much liquidity, they are just buying up everything they can. So the US is now very clearly very separate from the rest of the world. It is its own country, its own economy now. That's how big it's become. It is spending like it is its own planet. Very clearly, we can see that. So what's happening there is very different from what's happening in the rest of the world. Will be significantly different from what's happening in India. But this is the new world order. Like I said, the world was interconnected. It's starting to break away slowly. More factions will form, and India has to stay aware of all these changes happening and react much faster. In the short term, the final parting message, because all of us, again, we have to come back to our daily lives and our reality. We must prepare for worse. We are telling all our companies that please conserve your cash, prepare for a second possible wave, prepare for worse liquidity, worse access to capital, worse declines in revenue, in orders, in customers. Also, at the same time, plan for what recovery looks like. If a second wave doesn't come, if a large enough stimulus is announced, if the government becomes proactive again, we should hopefully have a strong recovery, because India is objectively a little bit better prepared than most other countries our size. So there are two superpositions of situations possible. One is much worse. One is a slow, steady recovery from here, and it could get better. We're advising all our companies to plan for both. They have to stay resilient. Most of our companies are young founders, sub 40 years old. So that is an interesting time in their lives. They would have never expected this to happen. For people who've been there before, who've seen the 2008 recession or the 2001 recession, again, most of them will tell you that we have never seen something like this before. That seemed like practice for what's happening now. So it is a strange time. We have to stick together. We are objectively seeing now more and more Indian business groups come together. IMA is a fantastic example. Communities are coming together to help each other out. We think that's a sign that the Indian economy will recover in spite of government, despite of government. We think that businesses will start helping each other now. Banks will start stepping forward. So there is a ray of hope, but we have to be realistic. We have to be careful. We have to keep our eyes open, and we have to try to work together. So with that, I hope that was useful. I tried to zoom through many things over the last 25 minutes. I'll end here for questions. Thank you very much.
I think we've got a very useful global as well as on an India level, what's happening. And some of the people are sending me messages that all those comparative graphs and analysis, it sort of gives you a much larger view, because we are so focused on our own individual businesses that we lose out on the larger trends that are happening in the global market and in our country as well. So now, and I'm going to invite now Samir as well. But now I'm going to focus more on microscopic questions, because that's what people want to know. So it will be much more targeted. But guys, while I take your questions forward to the panelists, please be sure that none of the opinions or suggestions they're giving, you should not take it as it is as a professional opinion. Please do your own due diligence. They are just here to share their views. So do not construe this in any way or any form as a investment advice. So with that disclaimer, Pranav and Samir, so I'll give you a scenario describing some of the questions people are asking me. That I am a typical SME in a tier 2 town, and I represent a large part of the Indian economy, right, from employment and GDP contribution both. I am a small SME. I do not see any revenue growth or any demand for next 6 to 8 months. I have fixed costs. I have people I can't get immediately rid of. I have factory or plants and branch offices, and I have debt payments which I have to give. So that's my situation as an ordinary SME. What is your suggestion? I mean, on a sweeping level, I'm not going into specifics of the company that, what is their, all those financial ratios and everything. But what should an SME like this do? Should they wait and watch out? Should they put their business on hold? And when they see signs of recovery, then open back their business? Should they take short-term, credit at a higher interest rate just to keep the ball rolling? Should they cut off their employees and operate on a minimum level? What are the options and scenarios possible for such an average representative SME in Indian tier 2 town? And what should they do? I mean, they're all clueless. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for them?
Samir, you want to go first?
Sure. So I think, a lot depends on the exact scenario and the industry and the space that the company is in. So, but at a high level, this is there are still many unknowns in terms of how this is going to play out.
Pharma, right? And all those lucrative sectors. Yeah.
Right. If it's not, I'm assuming that it's not an essential and, it's not got the tailwinds, for the sectoral shifts and consumption behavior patterns. If that's not the case, I'm assuming that if it's been badly impacted, I'm just taking that as an example here, just as a smaller piece, which are majority of the businesses right now. So I would say, it's important for people to realize that we don't know what's going to happen from here, right? There's still many unanswered questions. Whether clearly seems like the last, 10 days, the number of cases is increasing quite a bit. There's a lot of, migration of population, which is happening post the easing of lockdown back up country. And as we all know that the healthcare facilities up country are not as good. So we are totally unprepared for what's coming, right? In a scenario with that as a backdrop, in terms of we don't know, there will be so much of uncertainty and heat of lockdowns. I think the best thing that any business can do is conserve cash and reorient their businesses and wait for, to some extent, let the storm pass. And not be too bold and take on too much debt and lever up in any sort of way. So I think the most sensible thing to do is just to make sure that you can survive and you can cut your costs in such a way and focus and reorient your business if you can into areas where you can get some bit of the demand back. But if you can't, my suggestion would be, this is not time to be very bold and brave. If you've got an existing business going, keep very good cost control going, and just wait, till some bit of, there's more clarity in terms of how this is going to end. Obviously there can be some very good things which can happen, which are vaccines and things like that. That will lift sentiment. But the practical thing even there is if a vaccine is, there's so, and I've been getting calls and speaking to a bunch of people as well, different businesses at a very, and as you know, that the answer could depend vastly based on the specifics of the company in this space. At a high level, conserve cash, stay low. If you can retain your staff if if you can't, it's fortunate. But survival is the best thing that you can get out of this. And if you can work through the internal processes, work on the one work, and get it when things get better. Use technology, focus more inwards in terms of what can get better with the business. I think that's what my advice would be. Pranav, I don't know whether
Yeah,
you wanna
Karthik.
add
So,
something to
so
that.
Karthik, am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. So, Karthik, I think there are two significant challenges for SMEs, and I'm talking about unlisted SMEs. Some of them are startups, of course, but most of the SMEs in India are not. So there are two big challenges. Number one is there's been a sudden liquidity crunch. Of course, we are not getting revenues. Collections have gone near zero. Most of the industry is not getting any cash inflow. So that's something that very few companies can plan for. No one plans for 0, 10% of what you're expecting to collect every month. So that's a difficult challenge. And the second challenge is, of course, the government has not been an ally to business in the last 2 months. We have to be clear, whether we support the government or not, whatever your political views are. As a businessman, the government has not been very helpful. For example, the advisory on retaining your employees, making payroll, the Prime Minister himself personally requested business to cooperate, and businesses have. I think businesses have taken a moral obligation to protecting their employees at a time like this, which is fantastic. The whole country came together. But in the last 3 weeks, different states, different district magistrates, different district controllers, everyone has had a different interpretation of what that advisory really is. Is it a moral advice? Was it a request? Is it a directive? Is it an emergency ordinance that was passed? The execution of intent from the government side has been extremely high variance. That's a nice way of saying we don't really know what is supposed to happen on basic announcements like this. That has caused a lot of confusion for SME owners. That's caused a lot of confusion for employers as well as employees, right? So that's something that I think that had to have been done better. And from our side, we certainly sympathize. We've tried very hard to talk to all levels of government to get clarifications, but it has been slow. So these remain challenges. These challenges have not gone away even after the lockdown exit post May 3rd. So what can businesses do? Given those two big challenges, we have proposed to our businesses also, and I can give that advice to everyone, that here's what you can do. The first thing you can do is renegotiate your fixed costs aggressively. So whether it's your landlord, whether it's your warehouse owner, whether it's banks that have a co-ownership rights over property that you've taken a loan for, whatever you can do to renegotiate your fixed cost payments, you must do. Most businesses have. You don't need someone like me to give you that advice. That's something that we have to keep doing aggressively. That's the first thing we've asked all businesses to do. And like Samir said, that is helping them stay alive for now. Second very important thing is all business owners must go back to their banks and negotiate hard for any significant line of credit that they can get. Of course, they shouldn't overborrow. Again, like Samir said, you have to be careful with leverage. But banks have been given money straight from the top, straight from the RBI, specifically to help Indian business. If banks are the choke point and the liquidity is not coming to business, that is something we have to hold the banks accountable for. It is in our interest we do that as employers, as business owners. If we don't put pressure on the banks from our side, that money is not going to come. So we have recommended to all SME owners, all employers that we know, we have to go to the banks and negotiate hard. And the banks have to do this. They've been told to do this. If they're not doing it, we have to hold them accountable. The third thing we were expecting by now, Karthik, is the government would give back GST refunds quickly, because that is our money, right? That's our property. It's not the sovereign property. We've paid it in advance. We've helped the government with their cash flow issues over the last 7 or 8 years. That is money that should come back to us. They have not released all of it yet. That should hopefully give relief. But again, you have to fight for that. You have to keep calling your local tax authority and asking where my refund is. So that's something that we're seeing business owners do. It's minimum, but at least that should help. Unfortunately, there is not too much other practical advice. I cannot advise businesses to let go of their staff. I cannot advise businesses because we don't know what the rules are. I cannot advise businesses to stop paying rent because, again, what happens? Is there a rent moratorium? How does the interest moratorium apply to business owners? Those clarifications have not yet come. So we are hoping that over the next 1 to 2 weeks, there should be more clarity. And we hope that the next relief program will offer a lot more relief to business owners and employers. So it is a bad situation. It's challenging. I won't lie, but that's what we are telling people in our network so far.
No, but that's a good advice. I think Pranav and Samir, that just fight off your fixed costs, guys. I mean, that's the best you can do at this stage, because they used to say zero budgeting. Now it's like zero revenue forecasting. So all you can do is fight your costs, right? Which brings me to a different dimension now, Pranav and Samir, that now imagine a situation of a young entrepreneur, who has just started his business, or maybe a second time entrepreneur, but early stage company, making a product around SaaS or technology. Now, the challenge for them is, they've all sort of seen in movies or heard from stories in conferences that, you need to sort of wine and dine, meet the investors, build relationship with them, and do all that schmoozing. And that's how you are able to then, raise your funding. Now, all that is not possible. You can't meet these investors. They get so many emails. They're doing webinars and everything. But what can a small young entrepreneur do to get attention of venture capitalists now? And now, is it a good time? Can they? And many of them are shy entrepreneurs. They're not very, confident of presenting themselves on a video call. The dynamics are very different. Even investors are not able to judge you properly. How do you see that dynamics of investor and potential investee relationship panning out in a virtual only kind of a world?
Samir, you want to go first?
So, I'll go first. I think everybody's adjusting to a new reality here, right? I think it was tough for generally entrepreneurs to reach out to investors and raise money. And of course, given that, early stage investing is all about people and judging people and meeting people and getting to know them, studying the body language, all of that. It's not easy for even us to kind of, do this virtually or Zoom or any of that stuff, right? So there have been this thing is a macro shock. So it's impacted our business in terms of we have invested heavily into the market and obviously are adjusting each of those companies, our portfolio companies to a new reality. So spending a lot of time doing that. But, at least I can tell you that we are actively looking at companies, but we don't know how long this will last. But the pool of companies that we are looking at right now are companies essentially that we have known before, or have interacted with before, or have some kind of a touch point with the teams before. Maybe we didn't do the last rounds, or we missed seeing those. So we're reaching out to those where we have an entrepreneur touch point to start with, or we are reaching out, or we are talking very, having deep conversations with people when somebody who's connecting us to them, or the person who's connecting that entrepreneur to us we have a lot of trust in that person. So, but we need some kind of validation on the person and some bit of stuff coming through the trust network for us to be looking at something right now. As I said, we don't know how long this would last, but I would assume that, early stage venture investing will be a little subdued over the next few months till clarity emerges. And given the fact that it is so important to meet the team, it's going to be difficult. One thing that I would advise entrepreneurs to do is, look at, try and extrapolate what reality will be going forward, right? Obviously, discretionary spends in major categories are going to be, kind of subdued heavily over the next year, even in the local, in India, even globally, right? Essentially, so, if entrepreneurs are thinking about what they're building, they should think about it as a must-have and as an essential service, and not like a discretionary spend. I think that's one advice that I would give entrepreneurs at a high level, that whatever they're working on, it should be a painkiller, or it should solve an immediate pain point for the customer, and ideally help them get more business or reduce cost. One of those two, getting more business is always good at this point of time. But rather than just being something that was very dependent on meeting the customer and selling to him, or the proposition not getting conveyed very easily. So because the new reality is that you have to sell digitally as well. So the other side has to see that particular offering. So value proposition has to be an essential thing, that they have reduced budgets to spend, and they're going to reorient their budgets towards what is essential to them. So you have to get your proposition and your positioning to the customer very fine-tuned and make it very essential, and see if they really need that particular thing. Otherwise, you're just barking up the wrong tree. So you have to hone in your efforts with investors, your customers, vendors, across the board, kind of adjust to the new reality.
Okay.
I don't know, Pranav, if you
Pranav?
want to add more to
Yeah, I'll
that.
just add one point to that. I think I agree with Samir 100%. There is going to be less investment activity in general because it's not that people don't understand the risk. It's just that risk and uncertainty are two very different things. And now this is not a risk environment. This is an uncertain environment. It's a very different environment to invest. So my advice to fresh entrepreneurs starting a company now is may not be the ideal time to raise. So focus the time on building a team, building a product, testing your understanding, talking to customers, all of which you can do more of now because everyone's working from home. So everyone is suddenly have more time on their hands. You don't need to spend 1 hour on traffic for every meeting. So take advantage of the situation, learn a little bit more before you raise money. And when things come back, and they have to, even this will end, like everyone says, the money should come back again, especially to the early stage. The early stage usually bounces back first and is the last to leave and the first to come back always. We think that that's the advantage. That's a situational advantage you must take as a young entrepreneur now. For existing entrepreneurs, like I said in the earlier point, it's a very different situation. It's about protecting cash, protecting your base. It's two very different scenarios for starting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs with operating companies.
Right. And since you mentioned the entrepreneurs with operating companies, I have a more contentious issue to discuss that, we all know with this increased, let's say, for lack of a better word, scrutiny on the Chinese investments being done in the Indian ecosystem. How do you see that panning out and how that becoming a sort of a deterrent for some of the Series B, Series C, or even Series D level of companies who were raising large amounts of capital from Chinese institutional investors? They are very active in our ecosystem. How do you see that impacting the overall investment in the more established firms as such? Any one of you?
First. Yeah, I can go first. So I can tell you an interesting lesson I learned, Karthik, very recently. A number of startup founders had gone to government in Delhi to ask for certain relief and explain their situation and so on. One bureaucrat said something very interesting, and I can share this without giving names. And of course, I was not there, so this is secondhand information. Let me add that caveat. But that bureaucrat said something interesting. They said, look, all of you have raised billions of dollars, and a lot of it has come from outside. And in the process, you have not paid a single rupee of tax. So your valuation may be 10 billion, 15 billion. You may have 100 million customers. I can't count all these numbers. I don't know how to count all this. But all I can see is you pay not a single rupee of tax. So what makes you think you can come here and ask for relief, ask for the relaxation of norms on China and so on? So while we can talk about these things, the reality in the powers that be is a little bit different, right? So if we work our way down, I think whatever your politics might be, every country has a right to determine its own sovereign security. If our government decided that there is a economic vulnerability in being open to one country like China right now, it's fine. They probably have their reasons. We don't have access to all that security information. So whatever they passed, they passed. That's not going to change. What we have to understand now is what will be the process for approvals, because they have said very clearly there'll be an approval process. So what I have a problem with is not the announcement, it is the delay of the process. Right? You can announce, okay, there'll be a new process of approvals. Tell us what that approval process is, and then we can react, we can respond. Right? So that process has to be announced. We are waiting for that to come. I don't think they will ban all investments from China. That's unlikely because they have been large participants, and not all that investment comes for control. Most of that investment has come as a financial investor taking a minority stake. So I think there'll be a new set of rules for investors from that part of the world. We have to wait and see.
Okay. Samir, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. The Indian market, as if you look at it, the venture market on the whole is pretty capital constrained. And the way I look at it is there's a lot of, I look at it as a barbell, right? Like a dumbbell, right? There's a lot of early stage seed, angel, Series A kind of funds like us and others, right? There's a lot of that early stage money there. And then it's a very thin pipe of in the middle, right? Growth when investors are relatively lower. And the participants who were there in the country were the hedge funds, the American hedge funds, and all of those have kind of disappeared because the market has completely, the public markets have taken a hit. They're reorienting their portfolio and all of that. So there is a massive, it's a pretty long pipe there of very few investors there. And then of course there's a lot of, I would say, dry powder on the late stage side, the much later private equity side. There's a lot of money on that side. So that's how I look at the market. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed as much. There have been some periods of a lot of liquidity and hedge fund people and Chinese investors and the likes coming in and investing into it. If you look at majority of the capital that's gone into the country over the last few years, a large part of it has been Chinese. So a lot of these guys have been sitting and they understand a lot of this market building phenomena. They see some parallels between China and India, and they've been bringing in some knowledge and capital into the country. So I see that as an essential part, of the system. And it's also that companies have got oriented towards building in a particular way, given that some of these companies had money from China and there was a convergence in views in terms of how they should build them. The knee-jerk reaction of the government to do this without, when there's such a dearth of capital in the economy overall and liquidity is dry, I don't think makes any sense. And, I really wish they had thought this thing through, or because, what we've seen as a situation is that we had two of our companies post term sheet stage, and both were growth rounds. Both fell through because the investor said we don't have any clarity in terms of how this would happen, and these were going towards definitive documents, right? And signing agreements and things like that. So just without the government doing something like this without having a plan of action or clarifying things has brought in so much uncertainty in a time when companies need cash, right? And so that's the macro thing. And obviously we've been following up with the ministry and all of that to kind of get more clarity. It seems like they will be addressing some of these things through soon. I believe that it will be, if the companies are not, if the Chinese investors are not taking control in the companies, then I believe the indications are that they will allow those on a case-to-case basis, unless they're in strategic key industries like defense and the likes, which I don't see have much Chinese investment in. But they will allow those, but certain spaces, where they see that their companies taking control in those are definitely areas which are going to get hampered, and those companies should be well prepared to raise money from other sources. So my sense is that there'll be clarity emerging, but it's just not been a very pleasant reaction by the government on this issue, and without any clarity. So we've been at the receiving end of it, and I know a number of funds have been at the receiving end of it, and it's just not done.
Okay, fair point. On a related note, a lot of companies also, shared with me, tell me that, many of them have been in discussions, have term sheets sort of signed up, offer of intent, whether it's raising funds or M&A. And now suddenly, and you guys are the financial wizards, you always have some milestones and forecasting linked into some of these complicated agreements. And now they're all citing, contractual obligations of material changes in valuation and forecasting. And many of these companies are now left high and dry, and they are clueless that, what they have signed themselves into. What is your advice for such entrepreneurs who have got themselves in this kind of a sticky situation where their valuations and certain terms and conditions have been significantly changed in a deal because of material changes?
It's a tough situation, Karthik. I mean, there is no straightforward answer to that. You have to understand from the investor's perspective, this is a complete shock. From the business's perspective, for no fault of their own, suddenly they are being held responsible for whatever's happening to their business. It's out of their control again. So I think the most practical advice we've seen being given, and it's not our advice, it's the entire investment industry is giving the same advice, is that the business owners must stay in touch, must continuously continue to engage with the investors. Both sides must wait for some kind of normalcy to be visible. Of course, some of these deals might be irreversibly, dumped away. So they may not come back in the same terms, or those investors may not come back to invest in that business. But this is an unpredictable situation. So the most realistic advice we have seen is stay engaged, keep talking to the investors. Things have to come back, and we should see some of this uncertainty go away soon. And when that goes away, hopefully you can get at least some money in. So it's only about survival for now. This is temporary. This is not permanent.
Okay. Samir, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that they were clueless when they were signing it. First step is don't be clueless. I think, when you get signed, when you sign something with the, I know young entrepreneurs are very excited about, signing agreements with investors, and, there's a lot of hot blood that let's sign up to it. We don't know, if it happens in the future, we'll take care of it. I think it's a shock, but it's also making a lot of entrepreneurs realize that they should not be clueless about what they're signing up to. And, that should be the thing in the future. They should know that these agreements don't go away that easily, right? And, just like Pranav said, it's very important to sit with the investors and see if, that this is seen to be an external shock to the system. And, if they're okay to kind of let go of some of the really hard clauses on material adverse changes and things like that, if they're ready to let go of some of those things. So I think it's important for the entrepreneur to work very closely with the investors at this point of time, but more importantly, realize that they have to be very, very aware about what they're signing with the investors. Also, it's not only about adding to what Pranav said, it's about survival. So, raising money at this point of time is critical, and cash is king. Conserving it is even more critical. So they should be very aware about reorienting their business plan towards a relatively newer, slower recovery. If it happens faster, you can always go back and raise more money. But reorienting the business plan, if in a sticky situation today, towards a sort of a slower, newer normal, and raising cash at try and raise it at favorable terms and not at very draconian terms. That would be my advice to any entrepreneur. But it's better to reorient and raise relatively lesser money with low cost structure to survive this thing through and see a gradual build up, rather than saying that we are just going to go gangbusters once things get better. So if things get better, the capital markets, as Pranav mentioned, that venture investors will be back earlier. So you're going to see the activity resume faster. But just try and survive and prepare for a new normal in this phase. Hoping for and preparing for yourself for the worst, but hoping for the best. I think that's what any young entrepreneur should do at this point of time. Not be clueless about what they're signing up to.
I think clueless is maybe a wrong word. It's about signing into some clauses like force majeure, right? I mean, you always know you're signing it, but you always know that you're probably never gonna use it. That's sort of a thing that you're clueless that it's gonna actually be enforced. When you were signing it. So I think that's happened to a lot of these entrepreneurs. Another interesting trend which I have seen, I'm sure you guys have seen it more, that a lot of company owners, whether it's SMEs or large companies, they are now trying to utilize their capacity and diversify into the more sexy areas like making masks or making sanitizers, and they've all diversified into it. How do you, and on top of it, many of them are also sort of trying to raise capital for those businesses in the form of either certain government schemes or credit from banks under specialized treatments, and then maybe that capital can also be used in other businesses they have through various channels. How do you see investors viewing that sort of diversification from an investor perspective when an entrepreneur sort of diversifies into different areas like this? Although on one side it's good that they are using it to sort of survive and trying to keep the lights on, but it's also a bit of a distraction. And sometimes when you start getting into government contracts and you are taking credit on favorable terms because you are into this line of business, and then you have certain other conflicts of interest as well. How do you see that being treated and viewed by investors?
I can go first. So it's always an evolving conversation, Karthik. I don't think any entrepreneur, any founder, any business owner will make those kind of calls in isolation. So it's always a conversation, a discussion. There has to be a pros and cons analysis, related party transactions, all the standard rules will still apply, right? So we don't see that as being too much of a problem. But where we're seeing this happening, and I think it's correct that it's happening, is when founders have realized their core business. For example, if you're a mobility company or you're a travel company or you are a city shuttle company, many of these things have been badly hit, of course. There's no business. If they've for temporarily pivoted to becoming fleets for business delivery, for logistics and so on, at least some use is happening. They're trying to get some cash flows in, or they're trying to keep their employees engaged. They're trying to keep them at work instead of firing them. So most of these efforts, it seems like founders are doing it for the right reasons. I don't think investors, I don't think board members are being difficult to manage, difficult with these kind of decisions. So I think I don't think it's going to become such a big problem. These are all temporary measures anyway.
Okay. Samir, you have any thoughts on that? Or you
Yeah,
feel
I
the
think
same?
I broadly feel the same thing. If you're doing it, just to keep the lights on and survive, and of course, if there's a temporary need that your core business has been hit, and if you can serve some of these adjacent areas, then you should do it. But you have existing investors in companies, and you have new investors. I think people are going to look at what your core strength is in your existing business, and before the virus, and if you're resilient enough, and if your business will come back to normal, or will come back, then they will invest into that. I don't know whether people, a company would pivot so hard and move on to just building PPE gear and the likes, and not go back to business as normal. I don't think their investors would be very happy about it. They'd be okay with that if you can keep the lights on, survive this particular period, and do a good social service, and make some revenue out of it. It's good. But I don't see investors getting very excited about new investors getting very excited about funding this particular business. I think generally venture investors, early stage venture investors, have an aversion to companies which are doing business with government. Generally, that's been the case.
No.
So I think that will always be. I can speak for a large part of the venture community. At least has that aversion, and I think that will continue to stay.
There's a flip side to this, Karthik. There are companies that are strong. They have not been too badly hit. So that's the other side of that question. And they are taking advantage of the situation. So they have cash on the balance sheet. They're able to expand into new areas that they were planning to do 3-4 years later. They can start now. They're able to hire people for cheap because suddenly there aren't enough jobs. So many people have been let go in certain verticals. So there's a flip side to this also. If you are in one of those industries and you have cash and you can take advantage, I don't think, again, investors may not complain. They may say, fine, that's the nature of what's happening in reality right now.
Right. So I think we are out of time with this. So I'm not able to take any more questions. But guys, what I'll do is probably I have taken a note of all these questions, and Rajni will help me. And I'll share some of these questions with both Pranav and Samir. And I'm sure they'll be kind enough to reply, at their earliest convenience. And I'll share those with you. I think to conclude, thank you so much, Pranav and Samir, for spending time on discussing some of the very hard questions. I know some of these are very conflicting areas. There's no right or wrong answer. All of us are crystal balling at this time, but it's always nice to hear from experts like you who have a larger perspective and larger view of how things are. So I think that's very helpful. And I think the message from both of them, if I may summarize, is don't do anything rash or bold. Stay focused, fight hard for your fixed cost, try to conserve cash for current times, and try to experiment maybe in few months from now when you see signs of recovery. Till then, stay low and stay focused on what you're doing, and do not try to experiment too much. So with this, thanks again, Pranav. Thanks again, Samir. Thanks, Rajni, Anubhav, and IMA team for organizing this. Thank you, everyone in the audience. Stay safe, stay at home, and we'll see you in the next session. Have a great day.